Good evening, I'm Leanne Pillay and welcome to Watchmen on the Wall. In tonight's show, Errol Naidoo speaks to Andrew Selley and Nadene Badenhorst about an important breakthrough in religious freedoms in South Africa. Errol also speaks to ACDP MP Cheryllyn Dudley about the implications of the Women Empowerment and Gender Equality Bill.
Andrew, you responded to the Women Empowerment and Gender Equality Bill. You made a submission to Parliament. What was your concern with that bill?
I think we've become increasingly concerned, Errol, with government interfering in religious freedom and in beliefs that people hold within society, and have increasingly been seeing laws that have been coming brought about by the government, which will rob Christians of their freedom and outlaw Christianity in South Africa, with massive ramifications for the Christian church. The result of that was when we became aware of the Wedgie Bill, we saw some things which we felt would be very dangerous for the church, and so we ultimately have now responded to government in Parliament and have had some wonderful successes, which we'll talk about just now.
Give us an understanding of what the threats were in that bill, the Women Empowerment and Gender Equality Bill.
Well, Errol, the object of the bill is exactly what the bill is called, the Women Empowerment and Gender Equality Bill. So it sets out to empower women and to bring about gender equality in all levels of society.
And you're not opposing that?
We're not opposing that. We, at the outset, perhaps we can say, for SA as an organization and as Christians, we're 100% pro-women. So while we commend the objectives of the bill, we were concerned, however, about the serious threat that the bill posed to religious freedom, freedom of religious expression, and the autonomy of the church to govern its own affairs. It's not only 4SA that was concerned. There were various interest groups from across the spectrum who criticized this bill and how the bill went about achieving these laudable objectives. One of the ways in which the bill hopes to achieve that is by setting a quota of 50% female representation in the top decision-making structures of the bodies to whom the Act will apply. So perhaps Andrew can spell out some of the practical consequences, but for some churches, particularly the Roman Catholic Church and the many Protestant churches who believe, for instance, that eldership is reserved for men, that would mean that they would have to, by law, be forced to appoint 50% female elders.
I can see how
that's just one of the consequences.
So Andrew, so that was your concern, obviously.
Yes.
So was the concern primarily about Joshua Generation Church?
No. You know, let me also spell some more consequences. The concept of the family, the nucleus of the family, from a Christian worldview, is that the husband is the head of the home as Christ is the head of the church, out of the book of Ephesians, chapter 5. This bill would have gone directly against that. And if a pastor, for example, had to, in a pulpit, preach that the husband is the head of the home out of the Bible, he would potentially be, if this bill was passed as it was, he would have been fined 10% of the annual income of that church, and if he didn't repent of what he had done and stopped doing it, he would have faced 5 years imprisonment. So you realize the concept, the nucleus of the family, let alone how the church governs itself, which would have had the same consequences did churches not comply, would have caused Christianity in the country to be outlawed, and would have literally put the Christian church that hold to these doctrines having to go underground to escape persecution in South Africa.
So this was an attack essentially on the authority and integrity of the Bible.
That's right. And it would have affected every Christian. So it wasn't necessarily only about fighting for Josh Gen. It was something realizing that no one is fighting this cause that we knew of to defend Christianity within this sphere, in this way. And we felt we needed to do something to make a difference to defend Christians in the country and freedom of religion in the country.
Errol, the difficulty with this bill is that as we see increasingly legislation coming through and the state dictating how the Holy Scripture should be interpreted and the state dictating ultimately what people should believe and not believe and how they should live their lives according to those beliefs, we have the situation where Christians and pastors who faithfully hold true to certain doctrines that they believe to be the correct interpretation of the Bible, they will ultimately end up in a situation where they have to choose between obeying their faith and obeying the law, with very severe penalties if they choose to obey their faith rather than the law. And that can never be justifiable in an open and democratic society like ours.
Absolutely. We're already seeing that happen in the United States of America and in Europe. So this is not scaremongering. Now, Andy, you were motivated to launch an organization called Freedom of Religion South Africa, 4SA. What motivated you to
Well, we were, as many watchers and listeners around the world are aware, we came up against a human rights situation where our belief in the biblical teaching that disciplining of children within moderation, we were told by the government, by the Human Rights Commission, that we would have to potentially stop that. And we, in that, suddenly got thrust into this fight for the freedoms of the Bible to hold to the teachings of the scriptures as we understand them. And out of that, I suddenly got thrust into a whole new world that I was not aware of, and I think most Christians are not aware of, and increasingly seeing bills and laws being passed that are very anti-Christian and seem to be literally aiming at the Christian church in some cases. So we're about to face, we've just had a victory on this bill, but there's a number of new bills and laws coming up, one of them being, we've just now recently heard the government of South Africa is set to outlaw spanking. It's no questions asked, they're going to try and do that. And the consequences would be for anyone who spanks their child that you would go to jail, or that they would put you under psychological evaluation. And obviously as a Christian, if you weren't prepared to bend in your convictions, you would potentially lose your children. The state would put those children in foster care. That's happening in June of this year. They're trying to pass that bill through. Then another bill, the hate speech bill, which is also coming up very soon. And the hate speech bill would literally cause, as it's written as we understand it now, if a pastor had to get up and say certain things are immoral, for example, the practicing of homosexuality is sinful before God, you would then be up for a hate speech, and the bill would outlaw what you're doing and would force you to stop doing it or face consequences, legal consequences. The bills are coming so fast that the thought of trying to rally the church to try and fight each bill just became just too much work. And I think we've realized we need to have a voice as the Christian church in South Africa. To give you an idea, Errol, we've had 12 million people support us, leaders representing 12 million people supporting us on our right to teach spanking as a church, to uphold our freedom of religion in that. And that's a big group. If you consider that only 25 million people registered to vote, we've got 12 million standing with us on this. And that causes government to take note. Suddenly government thinks, do we want to mess with these Christians? Because if they're going to walk out of our parties because of what we're standing for and resisting us, we're going to lose our constituencies. We're going to lose our power. And so as Christians, I realized if we would stand together as a Christian body, and I felt the Lord lead me to do this, if we would stand together, we could defend our freedoms, and we could continue to keep Christianity as a legal entity within South Africa. And so with that in mind, we've really set about to form an organization called 4SA, which will be an alliance of churches that will hopefully be able to speak to government and say, we represent, and I'm hoping for 12 million or more to come in with us, this number of people. And we say to government, you cannot do this. You're affecting our freedoms of religion. And my feeling is if we fight government through members like the ACDP and Christians in Parliament, United Church and other organizations like the Institute of Public Justice who would fight the fight on a legal side, we can make a difference in our country. And I think the bill that we've just fought and won on is a great example of how working together we can defend our freedoms, but we must act together now.
Now, amazingly, Andrew, there are millions of Christians that think just like you.
Yeah.
They want to see more action. Yeah. They want to see the church united and also speak with a united voice. But I don't think anybody has spearheaded that, has pioneered that movement. I thank God that God is raising you up to do just that. And I think the experiences you have had has put fire and passion in you. And I think that's exactly what people need to see from their church leaders. Now, Nadene, Andrew was talking about the big three. Tell us a little bit about that big three.
Errol, so as I explained earlier, there were a number of problems with the bill. One of the problems that many interest groups were concerned about was the very broad powers given to the minister in terms of the bill in its original form to appoint the bodies, public and private bodies, to whom the Act would apply. Also, the very broad powers given to the minister to enforce the Act. What 4SA did, as many other interest groups, at the public hearings that were held towards the end of January in Parliament, we had the opportunity to address Parliament on our concerns and to also present Parliament with recommendations, how we recommend the bill should be amended to alleviate these concerns. 4SA presented to Parliament. We voiced our concerns pertaining to religious freedom. And the good news, the victory, is that Parliament heard us. And Parliament accepted our recommendation to narrow the scope of the bill such that the bill specifically excludes from the application of the Act public benefit organizations. That means that churches, religious and charitable organizations are now excluded from the application of the Act. The Act doesn't apply to them. So the much of the potential harm that the act could have caused has now been alleviated and we believe has been reduced.
Now, you guys were instrumental in alerting the Justice Alliance of South Africa, the other group in
Cause for Justice.
Cause for Justice.
As well as the ACDP.
And the ACDP. Because this happened over the holiday, Christmas holiday period, and even caught us by surprise. But we thank God for your diligence, for being aware of this, for letting others know. And this is a victory, and it's a huge victory for the Christian church, even though many people may not even realize it.
Yes.
But if this bill, as Andrew and you say, had gone through, churches would be forced to put female representation 50% in their leadership. Now, we're not saying that that's a bad thing, but I don't think people should be forced by the state to amend their leadership based on what I would believe is a feminist ideology.
Definitely.
You agree with that?
Definitely, Errol, definitely. People need to have the freedom to govern bodies like the church as they understand the scriptures. And we're not saying that every church can't have female representation in their leadership. We're saying religious bodies must have the freedoms to interpret the scriptures as they believe right. And those groups have many women within them who believe that themselves. And so those women, their rights would have been infringed because they wouldn't be able to live out their Christian beliefs as they read the scriptures. And so we must protect these freedoms, even if we don't fully agree with them on all areas.
So this is not anti-woman?
Not at all.
Errol, perhaps as a woman I can come in there. For me, when the word speaks about the different roles that God has assigned to men and women, and for those churches who do believe that eldership is, for instance, reserved for men, for me as a woman, that is a place of safety, of protection. What the word speaks about is for men to lay down their lives as Christ would lay down his life for the church. So it is a place of protection. It's a place of safety. It's not a place of oppression. And for me as a female, that is liberating. That is empowering. So quite the contrary to what people may think in terms of, it's just entrenching traditional and patriarchal attitudes. It's not that at all. It's God's order, which for me is a place of protection and safety.
In South Africa currently, more than 64,500 women are raped annually in this country. More than 25,000 children, babies as young as 3 months old, is raped and abused in this country annually. And those figures are not going down. The abuse of women, what we see in pornography on television, are all over the show. It's a plague that demean and degrade women. Do you think that if this bill went through the way it was intended to, and private and public bodies were forced then by government to have 50% representation across the board, would this reduce the violent attacks against women, the rapes?
No, I don't believe it will actually solve the problem. As the ACDP has said also, there are deeper lying issues, such as poverty, education of women, hot attitudes towards women that need to be addressed rather than just sticking on a quota and in that way hoping to resolve issues. We've seen in the past with other systems that often quota systems ultimately end up being window dressing, with people not really playing the meaningful role that was intended by the quota system. So that a quota system window dressing is simply not, it's commendable, but I'm not convinced that it will ultimately solve the deeper problems pertaining to women in our society.
Absolutely. Andrew, for SA, is it representing Christians only, or do you represent religions across the board where their religions are being attacked or challenged?
For SA, this will be a Christian group. It'll be a grouping of churches, I'm hoping, that could ultimately speak with one voice when our freedoms are being attacked. Because we're a Christian voice and we'll be defending religion's freedom in the country, we would be prepared to, as a church, defend anything pertaining to religious freedom. Because we believe that people within a democratic society must have the right to believe under a government, a secular government, as they want to. And so our primary fight would obviously be Christian, and we're a Christian group, but we would fight for things that affect religious freedom, because obviously what affects a Muslim group would affect us by default, because religious freedom is being crossed.
Yeah, and you're going to be working with institutes like Institute for Public Justice, that is a legal group that is going to legally defend Christians and churches and parachurch organizations and ordinary people from the kind of attacks that we're beginning to see increasingly in our society. So you'll be working with it very much so.
Errol, perhaps I can just explain there from a legal angle. As much as, particularly in relation to the women empowerment bill, equality is a constitutional value. So religious freedom is a constitutional value as well, as equally worthy of protection as the right to equality. And what our Constitutional Court has said already in various cases is that the right to believe or not to believe and to manifest one's beliefs according to what you believe in practice, to live it out, that is one of the hallmarks of a free society. Right. And so the right also for a church to govern its own internal affairs, that forms part and parcel of the right to religious freedom, and therefore it is even entrenched in our Constitution and worthy of protection.
Absolutely. Andrew and Nadene, I want to thank you for what you're doing. I speak to Christians all over this country, and the concern increasingly is about their rights being taken away from them, their rights to believe what they believe and speak what they believe. That is a fundamental human right, as you have correctly said. So, Andrew, you're trying to rally the Christian church in South Africa behind this initiative. So how do they get hold of you? How can people contact you if they want to be part of this?
Man, we really do want to encourage both the people that are watching this program as well as pastors or leaders of different denominations or groups to contact us. If you're in a church, get your pastor to contact us. We're trying to get together with leaders, Christian leaders across South Africa who can let us know where you are, give us your details. We'll contact you with how things can work and hopefully begin to work as a united front when things like this come. We're asking you to get a hold of us so that we know where you are, and then we will hopefully as an organization stand up in government, in parliament, and say, we, the Church of South Africa, representing 12 million or 15 million or whatever it is people say. And we trust that in doing that, we'll begin to see government taking note of the Christian church, the sleeping giant who's waking up in our country. If you want to get a hold of us on email at speakup.za@gmail.com. Get your leaders to contact us. We need to find out where you are in the body of Christ and unite together around, for we say, freedom of religion in South Africa, and stand together to influence our societies and uphold our religious freedoms. Thank you.
Cheryllyn, we spoke to Andrew Selley and Nadene Badenhorst of Freedom of Religion in South Africa about the Women Empowerment and Gender Equality Bill that has just been amended. And they were worried that this was a threat to religious freedom. Do you agree with that?
Yes, there's continuous attacks on religious freedom, and this was one of those. Fortunately, we did manage to actually present an argument that was reasonable enough, and we did get the ear of the minister and the department. Fortunately, I would say that this attack on freedom of religion was going to attack other institutions that they hadn't foreseen it undermining, which helped, I think, in this instance.
What were those other institutions?
Traditional leaders, the areas that this sort of bill, the lobby groups would actually want it to focus on, because the lobby groups would want it to focus on the church and traditional leaders. But when it comes down to actually where the ANC want to give the lobby groups what they want, they clearly have huge constituencies, both in the church and in the traditional situation.
Now, this is obviously seen as a victory for religious freedom and for the church, because the presentations made to Parliament by Freedom of Religion, SA, the Justice Alliance of South Africa and others. But do you think the amendment came as quickly as it did? It's because we're heading up to an election?
Well, when the ACDP first picked it up, we were quick to say that this was going to have serious unintended consequences, and we moved on it straight away. Obviously, organizations like Josh Gen and the Religious Freedom South Africa, JASA, we'd been in contact with them. We'd been working strategically with them in terms of getting the presentations that we felt would actually be helpful, take the process forward quickly. And I think that's an important point, is because when a committee is sitting, these are things that are broadly important because they've found their way into the ministry. But at the same time, those specific people sitting on that committee are not necessarily getting their heads around the issues. So the presentations have to be so precise and so specifically helpful. What the members of Parliament want to know is what is the problem, and what, as little as possible, needs to be changed to rectify the problem. And we gave them that. And in giving them that, it made it easy for them to actually correct the situation.
Now, Andrew and Nadene mentioned the ACDP and the role you guys played in helping inform them and helping them with their submissions to Parliament. Does this again illustrate why it is so important to have Bible-believing Christians in Parliament to help these kind of issues along?
Oh, absolutely, and one of the main reasons for us being in Parliament is the fact that we know that religious freedom is under attack, will be under attack always. And if people who don't understand those issues are not there on the spot helping, and of course it's not always helpful to take an adversarial sort of stance. Right. Sometimes it's really helpful to actually get alongside of people and help them to find a way to correct the situation. Sometimes it's a win-win. In this situation, it was a case of that. 20 years of experience working alongside colleagues, you know how they react, where they shut down, where they open their ears, what is helpful, what's not helpful, and that clearly paid off in this instance.
So this is a victory now. There's concern in amongst Christians all over the country that there are other bills that's going to be tabled after the gender.
Well, let's take this bill anyway. This bill is not just an attack on religious freedom. It's an attack on something that's affecting everyone in this country, and that's jobs. We have a major problem. People are not able to work to actually look after their own families. Now, in this bill, the same thing that was going to happen, we are now out of the definition as churches, NGOs, and voluntary groups. However, business is very much in those definitions, which means small business, medium business, large business are going to have to comply with all kinds of stringent measures in terms of gender equity. And it's been specified a minimum of 50% female have to be in decision-making positions. That's a hard task, a call. You know, if you think about engineers, how many female engineers do we have? Agriculture, maybe not, but in many fields you're going to find that people are going to struggle, and the onus, it's really huge burden on them now in terms of administration, trying to, especially small businesses, there's enough hampering people becoming entrepreneurs and being successful in their entrepreneurial activities. So this is going to have a very sad impact.
Yeah. Now, you've been in Parliament for the past 15 years. You know the challenges that women are facing in South Africa. And I think this bill was trying to address that. But do you think forcing people with 50% representation in private and public bodies would address many of the issues that women are facing in South Africa?
No, it doesn't. You see, and it really does actually have the unintended consequences that we can't afford. And it affects those women. It affects also their sons, their grandsons, their husbands, their brothers, their fathers. So it's problematic in that sense. But more than that, it's putting a burden on women and an onus on women to have to do things that they don't necessarily want to do and be involved in areas they don't necessarily want to be involved in. Also the section that was it was holding political parties to having a minimum of 50% women. Now that, if you think about it, is actually is disenfranchising people, because within a political party, to get that party list, people will be voting from branches for who they want to represent them. Now, fortunately, like in the African Christian Democratic Party, we have that kind of situation where women are well represented. But if people are voting a certain way, and then government has said those people can't get in because they're a certain gender, you have to just place other people. You've really just actually cancelled out the vote of the people. So again, it's some strange consequences.
And then there's the issue of the family, because, you know, in my readings, there are a number of women now that's making the choice to stay at home to raise their families. And that's a good thing for the family. But this bill, do you think it will be detrimental to the family? Well,
you know what we've seen over the last 20 years? We've seen women carrying heavy loads of 3 and 4 jobs. And men being forced into a role of looking after the children. Now, for a time, that can even be an interesting sort of switching of roles. And it may be what a family wants. But very often, that woman is actually cheated out of being able to play the role she maybe wants to play with her children and in other areas, because she is the only one who can get the job because of the quotas and these kind of things.
Yeah. So Cheryllyn, there's mention of other pieces of legislation that's going to be tabled in Parliament after the elections. hate crimes legislation, the criminalization of parents for disciplining their own children. What are the chances of those bills making it through? And with the support that it has from, for example, the African National Congress, the DA and other parties. Do you think that we face stiff challenge when those bills are tabled in Parliament after the election?
We do. We face stiff challenge because those haven't just pitched up. They've been around for many years. They've got huge lobby groups behind them, and a lot of work's been done also even on the ground in terms of trying to get people's thinking in line with what these main agendas are. At the end of the day, what it is really is government interference in family. And it is also government wanting to be able to have the final say in terms of our beliefs, and that impacts on our freedom of religion.
Even what is being preached in the churches.
Yes.
Government wants to determine, have the final say of what pastors and preachers can preach and not preach.
Absolutely. And
That's
this
where
was,
we're heading.
yeah, and even at the time of the drafting of the Constitution, that was where the ACDP played a major role, because there were certain clauses there that we actually had pointed out at the time were going to impact on religious freedom. Now, it wasn't about necessarily abortion or homosexuals or any of the issues or people involved. It was about how far can government go in terms of telling the church what they can and cannot say on certain issues.
So it's the freedom of religion.
Freedom of religion, freedom of speech. Yes, so the freedom of the church to actually bring their people up there, and the freedom of people in the church to bring up their families with an understanding, with a biblical understanding, with an understanding of what we read in the Word of God.
So Cheryllyn, final question. How are we as Christians going to stop this onslaught against religious freedom by our government?
One way, we're going to have a significant number of people within a party like the African Christian Democratic Party. There's no other way. With all its faults and its benefits, it's an absolute necessity, because that is the only way you're going to get people in positions where they can actually hold fast to what they believe and make that difference. Now, it doesn't have to be a full majority, it just has to be significant numbers that will make it impossible for other parties to get the numbers that they need. In time to come, sort of huge numbers will make it simple. But really, we're a diverse society. We're never going to actually represent everybody in society, but we have been very good as the ACDP. One of the things that we have succeeded in is actually having good relationship with other parties, finding ways to work with them towards goals. So we've actually developed in that area, and I believe just with that little bit of increase in our numbers, we know what we've done with 2 people, we know what we've done with 3 people, let alone the 7 that we've had. So knowing those gains, any small increase in the number of representation for the African Christian Democratic Party will hold back some of this onslaught. The greater that number, the greater we can actually succeed, the more we can succeed in doing so.
Absolutely. I have to agree with you. So Cheryllyn, thank you for your work on the Women Empowerment and Gender Equality Bill and all the other bills.
Thank you.
That you, over the past year, have been fighting to uphold Christian values in Parliament, and we hope you come back stronger next year.
Thank you. We intend to, and thank you for all your work that you're doing on the ground as well.
Okay, thank you.
In the next segment, Errol Naidoo speaks to Peter Barnes, an apostolic leader with Grace International Ministries, about the upcoming general elections in South Africa.
Apostle Peter Barnes of Grace Apostolic Ministries, thank you for talking to us at Watchmen on the Wall. We're doing a series of interviews with prominent Christian leaders in South Africa regarding the upcoming elections. This is our 5th democratic elections. Now, 2014 is a significant year for all citizens. It's 20 years of democracy, a post-Mandela era, and we want to hear from spiritual leaders like yourself what God's saying to you about 2014.
I believe that 2014 is a very pivotal year for our politics. As you correctly alluded, it's our 5th democratic, election we're having. Simply because a lot of people up till now voted simply because of blind loyalty. It's no doubt that the ANC, were the party that was used to bring us, out of our struggle. But more and more, if you look at what's currently happening in the country, obviously the Madiba regime was something else, the Rebeki regime now with President Zuma, with so much things happening in the country, I believe people are more and more looking towards voting more with their heads and not just with their hearts.
That's right.
And so for me, it's very important that we, especially speaking from the perspective of the church, educate the people in the church properly, because I believe the church carry a lot of muscle power. Simply because you can see it during elections, the political parties come and canvass the pastors because they know where the power lies. But once they in power, they ignore the power of the church simply because I believe the church is ignorant of what we really carry. But I believe it's a vital year that anything can happen, and I believe that people will begin to vote based on who carry their desires, who look at their values, and who will be able to deliver the basic things that we talk about in social justice.
Now you used two very important words. You said pivotal and vital this year. We're getting that from a lot of people we speak to. Some people have even sent me emails saying they believe God is saying to them that 2014 is going to be a watershed year, significant year. God is going to do unexpected and new things. Is this does that resonate with your heart, or is this what you're hearing?
It's what I'm hearing. The only concern I'm having is still the way many times we as the church has been left behind in what our role really is as a church. I used to make a statement when I was still pastoring in Naidoo. If you look at typology and you take Israel as a shadow and coming into where we're currently at, I used to say that a nation that claimed to be Christian always get the government based on where the church is at. On the basis what you would see in the Old Testament with Israel, when they turn away from the principles of what God expected, God would allow them to get leaders that bring pressure or even take them into exile, that eventually turns them back. However, in our context, I believe that where the church stands with being properly informed, understanding the synergy that must be between government and church. Especially, my concern is where a lot of believers still believe government is from the devil. Romans 13 clearly says it is also ordained by God. It even calls them ministers that are there to take care of certain things within a nation. And I think if we begin to educate our congregant members that there must be a clear synergy, that even when you look at 1 Timothy 2, would therefore that prayer, supplication, intercession, giving of thanks be made for all men, especially for those who are in authority, that you may live peaceful and quiet lives. That tells me that we have a certain responsibility to play in what happens in our communities, because it literally puts the responsibility at the door of the church to pray for those in authority. Because if those who leads us turn to God, we will see a different government. By saying that, I don't necessarily believe that the church must contest for political power, but the church must be a voice, a conscience, and an influence.
That's right.
To be able to speak into government and be able to allow the things that we believe will bring blessing upon the nation to begin to infiltrate government. So the synergy is important, is that church is ordained by God, government is ordained by God. The difference there only is that government has an earthly authority, church has an earthly and a heavenly authority. And so if you go deeper into that, you would see that if there's a true synergy, how much the church can do that will even make government's work easier.
Now, Peter, you obviously lived through the apartheid era. You lived through 1994, the birth of our democracy. It's 20 years later. You've seen a lot. What is your view, your personal view of our political landscape as it stands now?
My personal view is that I believe currently where we're at, and it comes back to the first point I made, is that the country is well resourced. The potential in the country is immense, but it is the way we have set out positions within politics, because currently you are in an era where if you were a cadre or if you're in exile, you're put in a position. We have marginalized people that qualify for certain positions, and I believe that somehow there has to be a change coming. Now, the ANC has done a lot to a certain extent, no doubt about that. They've inherited a lot, but within the 20 years that they've been in power, we could have seen more if the will was there. Someone asked me, I think yesterday, would the ANC government ever be able to pull the country together? My personal view was, the way we're going, it cannot happen at this trend. Then they also asked me, would you then believe that if a European government takes over, they will be able to do it? My answer to that was, will they have the will to do it also? Because so far, if you talk about through forgiveness, you also have to talk about restitution. So again, there are so many ramifications one must look at. But my personal view is we have a great country, and if we can synergize things properly and go beyond our personal preferences, our personal desires, and look at social justice for the masses, we can see a tremendous change in our country. And I still believe there's hope for South Africa.
I believe so too. I think that's in the hearts of most of the leaders I speak to. People are hopeful, but there's many that are despondent as well. And when you talk about the moral breakdown in a nation, the decline of morality is startling. If you watch the trends since 1994 with prostitution and abortions and sexual immorality just growing, people are concerned about that. And what do you believe? Because we know it's a spiritual problem, that people need to come to God, they need to hear the gospel of Jesus Christ, but political leaders also play a role. And so liberal politics, if it feels good, do it, and everybody has human rights, just enjoy yourself kind of attitude, that's what concerns a lot of people. Do you believe that politics has a lot to play with the decline of morality?
I think there are two dimensions. The Bible clearly says, Paul puts it clear where he says that the law is not for the righteous, but it is for the ungodly, the sinners, and it gives everything you can think of that's evil, And in that context for me is that we have to be able also as the church to differentiate between where do we apply certain things and where not. The challenge we have is when we bring the law full-blown into the church, because it clearly says the law is not for the righteous. That is why even when you look at Romans, you will see it deals specifically with civil law and with government, etc., and legislation. But when the church is able to do or to come into what the church is called to do, where we are not supposed to advocate law the way we're currently doing it. Because for me is that if I approach government with grace, it's amazing what grace can do, because usually if you contest for political power, you go head on head with someone. If you are in someone's face and don't expect him to retaliate, it's not possible. And so that is why for me is if the church can be more gracious and the church can stop criticizing the person that is there and begin to take the role we're supposed to take as the church, and we can engage government corporately as the church. I mean, we have swaying powers, we have the numbers, the pastors have the pulpit to be able to influence the thinking patterns of the people. So for me again is that if the will of the church is there and we have the right approach, we will be able to graciously influence government. But if we contest with government will not listen to us.
So then what you're saying is we shouldn't be butting heads with government as the church, but we should be using the influence God gave us to influence government correctly.
It's exactly what Romans 13 says, because it even says the current government has been ordained by God. Then it says whoever opposes them, is opposing what God has put in place. And so I believe that, I said this the other day, if someone is in a boxing ring with his gloves on ready for a fight and you stand outside, you can advise him and he will take your advice. But if you get into the ring with gloves on and beat him and expect him not to beat back, it's not going to work. That is why I've never believed that the church must contest for political power. If you look at the principles of the 7 mountain principles, we must literally educate our people to be able to go into every sphere of where community operates, influence it. Because I don't have to stand in a corporate environment and say Jesus is Lord. I can live that. I can manifest that, because people will listen more to what I reflect from my life than what I say from my mouth. And so I know, I've lived in the Transkei for 21 years. I've worked with politicians at various levels. These people are not so anti-church as you think. It is just the way we have behaved, because they now see us as enemies. How many times do you get appeals from where is the church? Even during the Truth Commission, we were not even visible there. And so my prayer is just that we will wake up to our responsibility that God has put upon us, because I believe we have the power to sway through prayer, also through strategic education, and casting our vote based on where we believe, who will serve the country the best.
Peter, we have to go for a break now, but when we come back, I want you to talk about what is the church not doing that it should be doing? What hasn't it done over the past 20 years of democracy that it should be doing to better bring influence in society, better influence government? After the break, we'll talk about that.
Okay.
We're back with Apostle Peter Barnes of Grace Apostolic Ministries, and we're talking about elections and the church's role in our upcoming elections this year. So Peter, the question I asked you before the break was, what is the church needing to do that it's not doing already or hasn't been doing over the past 20 years to better engage society and increase its influence with government, with the social sphere of our country?
I think I will answer the question based on a personal experience of mine. I moved into Naidoo 22 years ago in 93, and we had our first democratic elections 94. 95 we had our first local elections. I was in the community 2 years. The ANC sent a delegation 3 times to me to stand for local government on the basis of how we were doing church, because my motto was that we cannot keep the church in the 4 walls of the building. The church has to be visible in the community, and whenever the church is visible in the community, government take note of that. Now, I declined and said to the ANC guys that my calling is higher. If I take your position, I take a demotion. I am here to serve the community unconditionally, but my calling is higher than standing in a political party, because as a pastor, my loyalty is to God. When you get into politics, there are a lot of things that happens in politics. That's why I personally believe if you are called to be a pastor, train your people to go into politics. And so what we did was we had several things done in the community, from cleanup campaigns to dealing with pornography in the community, to giving an appreciation for our counselors, bringing in speakers. I mean, we literally went in. I worked with COSATU, worked with SATU, worked with the teachers union, worked with the different sectors, go into the sports communities. And so your visibility will make people see that you are there for them. And once they see that, they're interested to hear from you. And so over the years, I've always said to them that I cannot go practically into politics, but I must train and develop those in the church to do that. And in 1 year, I had a counselor for the ANC, I had a lady who ran ACDP in the church by me for the whole of the Transkei. And that is strategies I use then to educate the church. So during election time, I will let all of them speak. What do they have to offer? I will then educate the church to our responsibility, never tell them what to do. And that way we have tremendous influence. Now, just to close that question with this thing, I had a guy that was the general secretary of SATU. He became an elder in the church eventually, of the way I used to work with him, to give them equipment, preach to the teachers, and he got saved. Cut a long story short, he was the general secretary for the whole Naidoo region, uncontested for a couple of years. When they had the COSATU thing the first time on television, then the general secretary came to Naidoo to see the teachers and was in my house for 2 hours. I mean, we spoke about the gospel, etc. This guy then getting saved, being in that influential position, came to me after a few months and say, he resigned from SATU, and he's reviving the teachers' prayer meeting. So I say to him, you are in a position of influence where you can literally sway what happens with education in Naidoo, and you are not going to pray in a corner. I said, look, do the prayer meeting, but stay in the position of influence. And I think that's where the church missed it. We always see politics as something out there from the devil. The wrong people are in the right position. So where are the right people? And so I believe, and this is what I'm coming to, especially the church, if we make this a long-term goal, and the church change its approach and begin to educate the people, because this is what I was teaching our people in Naidoo. I said the notion of the church is this. People would say to you, one day when I'm full-time, I'll be serious with God. And that means I'm going to go to Bible school, cut myself off from the rest of the world, and stand behind a pulpit. I said, no, the minute you receive Christ, everyone is full-time. If you're a teacher, if you're in politics, when you wake up in the morning, you are going to do your kingdom work for God, and government pays you for it. It's a matter of changing our mentality. And so I am saying, on what you're asking is, if the church become more visible, take the gospel outside the four walls of the building, reveal Jesus to the people, we would have drives like saying, find a problem in the community and fix it. If it's winter, fix windows. Go do something. But all we do is we are isolated, and we are proactive, we are reactive and not proactive. Whenever there's a problem, we shout, but we don't see how we can be part of the solution.
I want to ask you this. You've obviously been around for a long time. During the apartheid era, the church was at the forefront of the battle against apartheid, or the injustices of apartheid. And so many Christian leaders became known and prominent, like Bishop Tutu and others, for their role as church leaders speaking out against the injustice of apartheid. So the church was very active. After the birth of democracy in 1994, it's almost like the church went to sleep. So is it your opinion then, over the past 2 decades, that the church has grown more insular? And if you agree with that, and I'm sure you will, what do you think the reasons are for that?
I think the reason why the church went to sleep is to first to look at the fact that the church that was active during apartheid was not the Pentecostal charismatic church. It was your nominal churches. And then what happened then pre-apartheid is they were preaching liberation theology. So when freedom came, they no longer had a message. And so what happened then was their voice became silent, because also a lot of them took positions within government. And the quickest way to silence your voice is when you take a position, because now you are under different authority. There was a time when it seems like the charismatic Pentecostal church were beginning to make strides, because there was a vacuum. The Council of Churches were no longer playing that role they're supposed to play, simply because there was no longer a need for liberation theology. Right. And so there was a time when it seems like the charismatic church were coming through, and government was appealing to the church giving input, but it never really took off. Also based on so many divides within the church. I think if we can really just get our agenda right and just focus on the goal, we will be able to go far. But it is true, the church has become silent. There is a need for leadership to arise, prominent leaders, and somehow see and bring us back to synergy. But there is a vacuum, and it's that vacuum, I believe, that is causing a lot of things happening in the country.
So lack of leadership in the Christian church. So if you were asked to speak at a major conference of all the top Christian leaders across the denominational spectrum in South Africa, and we're leading up to the elections, and you need to tell them something that is going to help influence this nation, determine the direction, increase the influence of the church, what would you tell them?
I would tell them, first of all, as I said earlier on, that you guys have a lot of power in your hands. The church and media can sway ideologies. It can literally set mindsets. Go back to your churches, get your own facts together, educate the church, tell the people to go and vote. Because for me, it's an inevitability. People that say, and a lot of Christians that say, I'm not going to vote. If you don't vote, you voted. because a no vote is a vote for someone that you don't want in power.
That's right.
And after you didn't vote, you will then want to complain about what people are doing. You are part of that situation. So I would say, if we can go back to our churches, do not tell your people who to vote, but tell the people the importance of voting. Tell them to study and listen to what party leaders are saying. Look at their policies. See who will represent us in value, in our dreams, our goals, our aspirations. And then go out and get yourself registered and vote. You cannot not vote. There are people that shed their blood for where we sit today. As a country, we literally are a reflection of a miracle. If it was not, and I know during 93, 94, I was with Pastor David Maniki then. We drove through this country just to go and pray. Bloemfontein, all these areas. So if God could bring us this far,
That's right.
then we can take it further. But the church must wake up.
So you got emotional about that. It still touches you. 20 years later, when you talk about those times, it still brings tears to your eyes. That's amazing, because you're right. There's a lot of people that gave their lives for the struggle. A lot of church leaders, a lot of ordinary people that sat in prisons, that were beaten to bring about democracy in South Africa, and we can't belittle that. And so people sitting out of the voting process then are belittling the efforts and the sacrifices that many people made for our democracy. So I want to concur with you. And every pastor and leader that we spoke to said the same thing. Christians must vote. There is no discussion about it. Vote, study who the political parties are, what their values are. If they line up with your values, vote for them, but don't sit out this election. There is a registration process coming up soon, and so I want to concur with you that Christians need to get involved. But Apostle Peter Barnes, we want to thank you for speaking to us at Watchmen on the Wall. Thank you for your comments, for your wisdom, for your experience, and we ask God's blessing on your ministry.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And let me just say this. For the believers, I want to say, see God's face who you must vote for, because I believe that a person can look like the most uncommon person, but the Bible says the heart of the king is like water in the hands of God. God can turn a person and a government around within a split second.
That's right.
If it's within his divine purposes and within what he has purposed by his grace to do. So thank you so much, sir.
That's our show for tonight. Remember to vote your values on election day. Please visit our website, Family Policy Institute, and subscribe to Errol's weekly newsletter. The latest issue of Joy magazine is available now at all major retail outlets across the country. Please get your copy soon. Remember to SMS STAND to 48833 to support the work of the Family Policy Institute with a donation of 10 Rand. Thank you for joining us tonight. Good night, God bless, and remember to keep standing.